we'll jump in. Mike, thank you for joining us on the pair program. This is another bonus episode of a mini series that we call, How We Hatched. And it's a fun discussion just to kind of hear a little bit more about your unique career journey, where you came from and how you arrived at this current point in your seat today as the CTO and co-founder of Strider. I always like to start by, having you provide the listeners with the quick overview of Strider and the problems that you're solving here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And thanks for having me today. It's great. It's been great partnering with you. So Strider's goal here is to help large companies protect their IP at just a very high level perspective, right? To that end, we've taken a large set of data and we provide an outside analysis for that company. So that way the company doesn't have to worry about shipping large volumes of PII to us. We're able to automatically determine who are the employees and past employees and figure out what all their IP is that they have, so we can automatically figure out how it needs to be protected.
Nice. Yeah, certainly a mission-driven company and solving some big world problems that we all face today. And I would love to hear, a little bit of a flashback, if you will, on your journey. Maybe start from the roots. Where did you grow up, and always interested to hear how you got into the world of tech.
Yeah, it was quite a little journey. I was born in a small coal town in Pennsylvania. It sounds kind of funny. It's called Shamokin, Pennsylvania. Maybe 6,000 people live there. It was a classic small town. One middle school, one elementary school, and one high school. They were big into recycling back then because I got to my middle school was my mom's old high school. My elementary school was my dad's old high school, right? So it was kind of a very small town. When I was in the 8th grade, my parents moved down to Frederick, Maryland, right? I thought that was a huge place because they had like 2 high schools, something else. When I started there in 8th grade, they required every student to take a programming class, right? So I had a 9-week programming class and absolutely fell in love with it. Like it was like duck to water type stuff. Then when I went to high school, back in that time, my high school was an old magnet type school. So they actually offered computer programming for 4 years. So when I graduated high school, I'd been programming already for 4 years in high school, 2 years of BASIC, year of Pascal, 1 year of Fortran. But the cool part was, I was never a big sports player, very uncoordinated. But I was on the varsity computer science team when we actually did competitive programming.
Oh.
And my high school, we were first place that year in the country. So kind of got into it pretty early. My dad was a cabinet maker. My mom was an accounting clerk. So my parents told me very early I had to figure out a way to get through college. So I worked my way through college.
Yeah.
Started at 19 at IBM, working during the day. In the imaging processing group, and finished up my bachelor's degree at University of Maryland.
Very nice. So you were working at IBM while going to school?
Yeah, I worked full time. I went to school full time.
And coming out of school, did you continue with IBM, or where did your path lead you once you graduated?
Yeah, so once I graduated, 6 months after about 6 months after, IBM did their first layoffs ever. So they eliminated my entire division. And that's when it was one of the first startups I did. So 4 of us started our own company. That was much more in the bootstrap model, did consulting, built some products, very heavy in the image processing land. So I did that for about 3 to 4 years.
What was the name of this startup?
So that startup was called Pragmatic Image Technologies.
Okay.
So pretty small shop at the time. We didn't grow, and that's a challenge when you do a bootstrap kind of startup, right? If you're funding growth based on the billable hours you have, it's tough.
I don't think I realized this. That I saw it on your profile, but I don't think I realized it was a startup. So I'm always intrigued with folks that dive into a startup, pretty early age, and coming out of a big, stable company like IBM. Well, I guess maybe you didn't feel the stability if they were going through the layoffs at that time, but Where do you think this interest in the startup world came from? Is it something that your folks kind of were any entrepreneurs as well, or did you just meet up with a buddy that said let's give it a shot? Tell me a little bit about that.
My dad worked in the manufacturing space primarily in his life, so I saw that he wasn't able to control his own destiny. Right. And I think the best part about a startup and going out and starting your own venture is the ability to shape your own future and to build something. I was heavily influenced by his, ability to create cool things, wood products and cabinets and build things quite proficiently. I just did that on the software side. Mm. So a little bit of both of those things kind of came together to give me the ability to, that's why I've always kind of gravitated towards startups, right? So I think Strider is actually the 5th startup I've been part of.
Wow. That's really neat. Yeah, I love that being in control of your destiny. It's something that I actually preach to my team quite a bit as well, especially when you're going through a lot of adversity, you all have the ability to steer the ship, those folks that are leading the team. And as a co-founder, that's something that you got to be passionate about. Otherwise it's tough to keep folks motivated. So always interested to hear that. So thanks for sharing that. And then, it looks like you spent a couple of years in maybe in a couple of larger organizations after Pragmatic Image Technologies. So, talk me through those years, and then, obviously we'll lead into your long tenure here at Comscore as well.
Yeah. So after I was really wanting to finish off my master's degree, right? So I didn't really want to take off time from working to do that. So I want to do that. And that's kind of when I said, let's try some of these smaller, let's try a larger company, right? Do that for a bit, take a break from trying to build a business while doing all that stuff. And you know how it is, right? You're like, when you in a startup or whatever, you're working during the day and planning what you got to do at night. It's all encompassing. Tack on a graduate degree on top of that, it's even harder. So I figured, let me do this. And I'm in Virginia. I was living in Maryland at the time. There's all these different kind of government type places around, government contract. Let me try one of those, and I'll do just the master's degree at night. Was talking to folks, and I went to this one company, Global Management Systems, up in Bethesda, and was talking to them, and show up, and I get put on like a small project. And it's kind of funny. I've been in the work professionally my entire adult life in the DC area. I think I've only ever been on a government project for 2 months. Wow. That was the 2 months. First 2 months I was on that project. But then my manager came to me and says, "Hey, I saw that you speak German." I'm like, "Well, yeah, I took German in high school, like 3 years." "Oh, okay. You know German then?" I'm like, "Well, like 3 years. How would you like to go to Germany?" I'm like, "That sounds great. When? Next week?" "Oh, how long?" 9 months. There I was, off in Germany. I actually took my final exams from my hotel room in Germany. And I got true immersion, man. I was in working in an office at the German railway, Deutsche Bahn.
Wow.
Keyboard in German, Oracle in German, Lotus Notes in German.
Wow, what an experience.
Quite an experience. It was a great time. So best way to see Europe is on somebody else's dime, I'll tell you that.
Sure.
So I was pretty well set up. Finished off that stint. Came back, finished off my master's. And that's where I went to my next startup, which was Peregrine Technologies. So that's where I had the good fortune of meeting Dr. Majid Abraham, who was the who founded Peregrine, who was also the co-founder of Comscore.
I see. Okay.
Right? So started there. We built a multi-dimensional database engine. So a central theme of a lot of things, and from a data, has always been data. Right. I've always been interested in startups where there's a focus on businesses in that area. Did that. Showed up. 2 months later, they got acquired. Right. Not too bad. Show up at the startup, and 3 months later, you're already acquired.
Was that something that was, kind of made aware to you, or was it just kind of just the timing of it just happened to be right?
Just the way the timing worked out, right? Yeah. So, So I was there, and then I went to a small project at NESD, working on for NASDAQ area to help get ahead of some of the items for individual filing and things required for brokers to get licensed. Learned about that. Then after that, I think then I kind of made my way to ComScore, right? It was a couple little here and there type places. And that's where Majid had actually reached out to me, said, "Hey, I'm starting up another thing. I'd like you to be part of the team." I was like, "I don't know, Majid. I kind of like where you think I'm at." And I says, "Where you at?" And at that time, my wife, and that was my girlfriend, she was working right across the street. It's like, okay, well, at least I'll stop over. I'll be able to see my girlfriend, go out for dinner or something afterwards. So I stopped in, and he was telling me what he was planning to do with ComScore, right? Let's at this time, this is 99. We're trying to they were a lot of like all the .com mania was truly going on. Said, "Hey, I want to be able to predict total visitations to websites, but not just the visitations, but how much money was being transferred to move beyond eyeballs to actually understand how much revenue a company was pulling in." I thought it was a pretty compelling and a different way to look at the market. So I signed on there, and I was there for almost 18 years.
Yeah, this is quite a journey here. We can dissect this journey for a little bit. So you start as a senior developer. I take it. How many folks are there at this point? Just a couple.
I was the first engineer. I was the first engineer. At that time when I started, and then they had a VP of engineering that was hired after I had gone through the process of talking to Majid.
Mm-hmm.
And I came in. I was like, "Okay, we got to figure out how to." We presented 21 slides. Got $21 million in Series A funding.
Mm-hmm.
We have a bunch of servers showing up. We got to figure out how to make all this work.
Sure. And that's a healthy chunk back then, 21 million.
Yeah, 21 million was it was back in the day pre-seed, right? But
yeah,
you didn't have these nice things like AWS where you can just log on and spin up servers.
Sure.
I actually delegated the CEO to go get a U-Haul truck because we had to get the U-Haul to drive it over to the data center and do stuff like that.
Wow, that's wild. So you're joining this company as a senior developer, and first engineer really kind of hired. Obviously had a past relationship with the leadership, and did you have any idea at the for one, I guess the scope and scale of what was getting ready to take place? I mean, how was the vision kind of presented to you? Was it something that you're just kind of you're going to go with the flow here and see where it goes? But it obviously, we'll get to it. It turns into quite a success story.
Yeah, I think I'm always a big fan of understanding the big picture, mm-hmm. right, and then understanding there's a lot of little pieces. And it was, I will say that there were a lot of details we had to figure out when we got started. It was we'll just have some panelists, we'll recruit them, we'll figure out a statistical formula to have them represent the population. We'll figure out all the transactions they made, multiply it together, and then that's it. It'll be easy.
Right.
And you want to talk about the devil in the details on this. It's a lot, right? So I think at that time we found there was 27 different ways that you could check out of just Amazon. 27 different, checkout pages. The number of, that was just for one, albeit very important site, right? And all the different things, like how do you actually count revenue, right? Do you count gift cards? Do you count, those type of things? Some of the more interesting things, in a very strange way that prepared me very well for Strider, was when we started moving internationally to understand like total, because you're trying, nobody's curious about like how much revenue goes. They're curious about how much just comes from the US, but they want to know worldwide. So we started trying to run numbers internationally, and we saw these really strange problems. Like, why is there such a large amount of people buying things from US sites in Germany and Italy and things like that? And we were like, this just doesn't make sense. We start figuring out, well, these were folks stationed at military bases. Right? So how do you figure out that a person using a computer in Germany is actually German? right? You can't look at just their IP address, right? You can't look at their time zone. You can't look at these things. You actually have to figure out how many web pages are actually consuming in a native language.
Sure.
To get to this. So, I mean, just those kind of details are just amazing.
Sure. So let's talk about your journey through here. So you were here for, you said 18 years. You know, from the year 1 to year 5. What does this look like? Because it looks like you kind of quickly evolve into a VP kind of slot here. Or tell me about that progression. And did you know going into this that that was going to happen so quickly, and the amount of growth that takes place here from a headcount perspective? I'm always intrigued with how you evolve into this people manager, which you have to take on at some point. So talk me through those first kind of like 5 years.
Yeah, I think in the first couple of months, like, I'll just go start up. I'll just go code all day, and I'll just I don't have to worry about managing people and all that kind of stuff. I can just manage my code, and life would be grand. But then I realized, like, the visions you have are just bigger. You just can't do all of that with your own two hands. You need a team, right? And that's where I quickly got like, I was hiring these people and start allocating the work to them. And I was like, well, you should be the manager. And then that naturally became the manager of managers, right? To do all that. So really like the architect of the collection and the processing engine that was at Comscore at the time. Mm-hmm. So the first few years of that was building that foundational layer to get the company from just the initial A round through what we ended up doing through Series E, mm-hmm. right? To get to a point that we could go public in 2007, mm-hmm. right? So in 8 years, which is about the normal maturation time for a company to go mm-hmm. from like A round to going public.
When you went public, do you remember how big you guys were as a company headcount wise?
That's a good question. I think we were probably around 500 or so.
And so you first engineer hired. Now you clearly have a lot of different kind of folks reporting in at that point. You remain in the seat. After you go public. Well, let's backtrack for a second. So when you go public, we just actually ran an episode about this, about post acquisition expectations. But how do you get the team kind of rallied up for this big announcement? And is it something that is it like an office wide celebration? I'm always interested to hear. This is a big accomplishment. What goes on behind the scenes here?
Yeah, it's a big. That is such a dance to organize, right? It's like you have all these things. Like you have to start preparing people to say, "Hey, we're going from being a private company to a public company," and there's like all these disclosure rules, and you have to be careful about what you say because it could influence the market. You don't want to, you don't want to mess up the IPO, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a hard part. And then there's a whole thing of how do you manage the team? Like when do they, with all the kind of questions, like the minute you go public, well, that doesn't mean you get all your stock at that point, right? You have to, especially when a new company issues stock through an IPO for the first time, you have to manage how much of the internal stock can be sold at a time, mm-hmm. right? Because you don't want a whole bunch of people, but you almost have to educate a lot of these folks. So the first time they have any kind of large amount of stock offering, you have to explain to, I think we did a couple classes explaining what's the difference between a market order and a limit order. Like limit orders are your friends, right? Don't issue a market order if you have a thinly traded stock because you could actually crash. You could lower the stock price. And the first couple of weeks after you go public, you have to just tell folks like, listen, the things you do today will not influence the stock price today. Stop looking at the stock price. Yeah. All day long. That will not do anything for the stock price. Mm-hmm. Stress you out. Look at it at the end of the day, look at it at the end of the week, whatever. But the things you do today will influence the stock price 3 months, 6 months, a years down the road.
Sure.
Right. So I think that's the biggest thing you have to do with when you go through like an APO is you got to help the team understand this thing of like what you're doing today influences things down the road.
Sure. I almost use it as a motivator, to kind of stay heads down. This isn't the end of it. We got to keep moving.
Yeah. You got to think about remember, you guys are the ones building the future.
Right.
This is the things that you have to do now that will influence things way down the road.
Yeah.
But the things you do today are not going to influence the stock price today.
So I want to keep moving through this experience at ComScore, because one of the biggest things that we talk about at Hatchpad is how culture evolves at each different stage of a startup's growth. And I think those early days, right, the seed to Series A stages, those can be really drastic jumps. Where it goes from this kind of family environment to next thing is maybe you don't know everybody's name on the on a Zoom call, but what was it for you that you would say was some of those challenges with kind of maintaining one, like these types of culture that you're building, and as the company gets larger, do you feel like some of that gets lost along the way? You're a unique individual in the sense that you spent 18 years in a place, right? So for one, that's super rare. But for two, you started from really early stages, and so I'd love to take advantage of that knowledge and hear like what were those drastic kind of changing points from a culture perspective as you're building this thing.
Yeah, so I think I think even as you're building a company, right? I think the biggest question a lot of folks, and we saw a lot of this during COVID, which is the notion of people in multiple locations. Right. I think the smartest thing we did early on at ComScore, and also I think will pay huge dividends for us here at Strider, is the fact that we decided to do multiple offices very early in our journey. Right. A lot of companies will go to this, like, it's one building, this is headquarters, this is where everything's at, things like that. At ComScore, we actually did that very early. We actually started up an office in Chicago. I think it was right in, like, we weren't even like 8 months old, and we had two offices, one in Virginia, one in Chicago. And you had to learn how to collaborate with different time zones, different folks. And we chose very early to say that no, not all engineering is going to be just in Virginia or all in Chicago. We had those functions in both locations, right? So from a culture perspective, at these early ages, it's really good to get those early training wheels up to get to understand how to build, like, what is a company culture, but then how you can have those own little, like, quirks that's respective to each location. So the Chicago office had some things they would do somewhat different than the Virginia office, but we had a common thing of, like, this is how we jump in and we solve problems. We're data oriented. We focus on the customer, things like that. We pulled a lot of those same ideas that we did during COVID. And two of my Greg and Eric, they had to move out for family reasons out to Utah. We made the decision to stay here in Virginia and also have a presence in Utah.
Okay.
Built upon that. And I think that doing that early can be painful, but you learn so much from an organizational structure perspective. It helps you grow very fast, right? Especially if you go down the path of doing some M&A and you acquire companies and things like that. You learn how that you can have a corporate culture, but with individual subcultures so that they can still feel unique.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, because I do want to lead into Strider here in just a second, but sure. Before we make that transition, so you referenced the growth through some M&A at ComScore as well. Tell me about that. How you bring those folks in from in an acquisition perspective. Making them feel like they're a part of the team, and kind of level setting that across folks that were the ComScore, call them the OGs or whoever, what have you. But the new folks that come in, making sure it's not an us versus them kind of feeling. What are you doing on your end as a leader?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I reinforce to both sides, right, the OG, right, and the new organization coming in is companies are nothing without people, right? If you don't have those people that invented the items or created the technology, how are you going to get any future growth out of that, right? The idea is we didn't buy it for just a piece in time. It's about building that up and doing that, but to help them adopt that. They can have and still maintain some of their own unique culture, but realize you're part of the bigger thing. But it's not like, it's a separate company, mm-hmm. right? You're part of ComScore now. You're part of this organization and do this. And that model worked out really well, right? Because usually when you're doing acquisition, their headquarters are in some other location, right? And then you have to do that. And that we were able to do that for like a team in Amsterdam, team in Santiago, Chile, out in Seattle, California. It worked, that model, I think, in Toronto. I mean, it worked out quite well to just realize to everyone the saying, listen, yeah, they're the new folks, but remember, we need that technology makes us better and is something we could bring to market and makes the brand and the company so much more valuable. That's how you build upon that.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating too. And I think that's something that, when you're aligning with co-founders and starting something new, I mean, that's experience that I think is probably held extremely valuable. Bringing into a new venture. I'm always curious on how much that might appeal to your co-founders at Strider. But we'll talk to this Strider transition here. We'll wrap ComScore up. So 2009 to 2017. This is a huge stretch in your professional career, and probably your personal life is evolving. What was it about towards the later stages here at ComScore that made you feel like it's my time is up here. It's time for a new chapter.
Yeah, I mean, ComScore is a fantastic experience, right? I mean, I during my time at ComScore, I got married, had both my kids, lost my father, my wife lost her mother. I mean, we had all kinds of major events you could imagine during that time. Professionally, got listed as an inventor on 24+ patents, right, on all kinds of different technologies, from biometrics to Bluetooth frequency to cellular phone, tracking, to privacy protections, those type of things, and really got to grow to a major worldwide organization. I had 450 engineers reporting to me in the technology organization and running almost a 9-figure budget. Right, it was grew a lot faster than I thought. Bigger than I thought it was
from those early days.
Yeah. But as things go, then we merged with another organization. It was with a company called Rentrack, right? And at that point, a lot of my friends had moved on right after that. And for me, it wasn't the same group, right? The Majid, who I'd been with, for many years, Cameron, Serge, etc. All those folks, they were friends of mine. So it wasn't the same for me. And I was like, I've had a good run. Told my wife I'm going to take 6 months off. I'm going to work on that honey-do list you got for me. Right. And I had time to do a nice orderly transition. Right. So it was the time for me to move on, to just like, let me figure out what my next chapter in life is. But I wasn't exactly sure what that was.
Sure.
So that's kind of how that kind of came to the end.
Yeah, it sounds like you left on a high note, though. It was you left on your terms, and were made a conscious decision to take some time off, and then move on to the next venture. And we don't need to spend too much time on ID.me because I want to spend some good amount of time on Strider here. But
sure.
So you joined another startup, ID.me. They're also a local startup,
and local startup here.
Did a couple of years here, or just over a year or so?
18 months, just 18 months. Linda Abraham was an advisor, who was Majid's wife at ComScore, also one of the founders, and she was an advisor to ID.me and introduced me to Blake. Blake and I had a couple coffees, got to know each other, got along really great. Said, hey, I really like someone who came in who has understand how to build a scale an engineering team, help scale technology, get some of the items ready to go as we move to position the company well for future growth, right? Because they were eyeing the bigger contracts that you now see, like Social Security Administration, IRS, et cetera. So came in and helped put a lot of the building blocks in place for them to get to their unicorn status, right? They got to some pretty large deals. They were the first company to get certified against the NIST 863.3, right, which is the highest level of identity verification out there in the market today. And I think they're still the only one to be verified against that specification, which is a pretty big. But then, as sometimes happens, right? Your network reaches out to you, and I still call it the ultimate date. The ultimate blind date. Some friends of mine that in the tech community that are up at Data Tribe, who gave it Strider their seed funding, reached out and says, "We got some people who love to meet you, Mike. Can you come up to Fulton, Maryland one night?" I'm like, "Fulton, where? Where's Fulton?" So that's actually outside JPL. I mean, not APL. I mean, John Hopkins APL.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of innovation happening out there, actually.
There is
a lot of cyber as well.
Yeah, a ton of work in cyber. Went up there one night, and that's where I got a chance to meet Greg and Mike Janke, who started Data Tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, there's a big problem in the U.S., right? China is stealing $600 billion a year in IP from the U.S. every year. I was just blown away. And so from my own personal experience, I've had my code stolen, right? Not by China, but I've had it stolen, right? I've had my IP infringed on from patents that I've invented, right? And that's just wrong, right? So that message or that issue really resonated with me. Mm-hmm. So they hooked me pretty quick from a mission perspective. As we walked
this was just the co-founders at this point.
This is just the VC and one of the other co-founders.
Yeah, and for the listeners, so Data Tribe is kind of like a venture studio, right? They Think about like the East Coast Y Combinator kind of a concept. Right. So they give you $2 million, in funds to get started. They provide space for you to work. Mm-hmm. Some in-kind services.
A ton of in-kind services to help you get started. Credits in all the different cloud providers to get up and running.
Mm-hmm. They've produced some all-star startups out of the East Coast. So they've Dragos was another one.
Like Unveil, Dragos.
Yep.
Right. It's some pretty really stellar startups have come out of that model.
Yeah. And how do you know how they tracked down these the two founders from Strider?
So it's kind of funny. So Greg Levac, who's our CEO,
mm-hmm.
he's fluent in Chinese, and he has an identical twin, Eric Levac, who's fluent in Russian. Fascinating, background alone by there, but Greg had done a lot of work on the initial investigations into a congressional 301 report. So he did a lot of the work of understanding how China was stealing this IP and been true subject matter expert. Eric had gone a slightly different path after his MBA and actually was a VC, right? So he was actually helping to build the VC side up of the Sultan of Oman's sovereign wealth fund, right? So they were pitching Eric on to invest in Data Tribe, right, to get in on some of these companies. And the conversation came up, so, I'm part of it. I have a twin. And like, oh, he has a twin and he speaks Chinese, and started talking like what Greg was doing, which was this whole thing of helping companies understand how their IP got stolen.
Mm-hmm.
And Greg and Eric had been talking about for an idea that they should make this like not just a service, but a product, right? Like a SaaS solution.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Janke from Data Tribe was saying like, yeah, you should definitely do that. We should get that going. Why don't you come into my shop? We'll do that here.
Yeah, that's fascinating because they're from Utah, and Data Tribe being
actually from Maine.
Oh, they're from Maine. Okay.
So their family moved back to Utah. It's a little bit hard. Like it's like Maine, Utah, Taiwan,
right?
Rules. They got around.
They got around, but they found themselves in Fulton, Maryland for a meeting with you. And, it sounds like the mission was, resonating with you.
Yeah.
What was it about your experience that, was so appealing to them?
So it was kind of funny. So it was like, we're talking about this and they're like, okay, I get you understand data and playing with like crazy volumes. And they're like, well, how does the Chinese internet work? And I said, can I get up and start drawing for you? And I started drawing like the internet and like explain how the Great Firewall works. And it's just like, hold on a second. how do you know so much about the Chinese internet? Like, are you a China guy? Or you been to China? Like, never been there, can't speak it, can't read it. But I was the first person to measure it. So at ComScore, we actually had built the first commercial product that measured all consumer activity in China.
Wow.
Right. Did the same thing for Russia. Right. So that capability was just a huge game changer of like giving us just a turbocharged effort at Strider, because there was people on the team that not just didn't know the language. We knew the language. We knew the material. We knew how they were doing things. But we also knew how the technical matter worked. Right. So that was like a great, I give Data Tribe props for like organizing, getting us together.
Yeah.
Because it truly was the dream teams from a startup.
And did you think Mike Janke, had that in mind based on your ComScore experience, or do you think it was more about the scaling of tech teams and thought that might just be a really appealing connection point with them?
I'm going to give a little bit more props to Leo, Scott, and John Fung. So John Fung is now the managing director, right? So John was the one who actually pulled me, was the one who specifically reached out, pulled me into that conversation. Janke was definitely the closer, right? I mean, once he had he saw what we were talking about and saw the chemistry between Greg and I and Eric, he was like, you need to do this. And he was on me like white on rice. It was just like.
So this is right around, early 2019, middle of 2019.
It was fast. It was the end of March, 2019.
Okay.
That first meeting. And we got wrapped up all the papers and got everything fully funded by May 6th of 2019.
And so now we've got 3 co-founders, Greg, Eric, and yourself.
Yep.
And, you've got some funding from Data Tribe, and, talk me through the last, year and a half here. Obviously, a pandemic hits, so that shakes things up a little bit. What was those early stages like at Strider? Yeah.
So one of the things I learned about startups or any kind of organization is you need capital to survive, right? Mm-hmm. But capital is not unlimited, and capital comes with a price, right? Whether it's dilution or what have you, right? But it always comes with a price. So Eric, from his experience on the VC side, totally get that. Greg, from a leadership perspective, was 100% on board, but it was like, listen, we can't build a product that's sustainable if it's just all analysts doing things. We have to have the tech to like make this a game changer. We all agreed as we were like figuring out before we even got the funding set up, we set out a milestone driven approach of saying like, listen, this is how we will grow the organization. This is the order of when we'll bring folks on, right? Because 2 million sounds like a lot of cash, but that goes really fast when you start up a company where there's no revenue.
That's a theme we can bold that and push that out to a lot of startups and let them know. It'll save a lot of headaches down the line.
It really is. I mean, like you realize you got to figure out like path to like minimal viable product really, really fast, right? And you want to control how fast you hire because that's your biggest source of cash burn. Cash burn is something you got to watch like a hawk. So those early days, we kind of let that out. We put that out, but it was like, wow, we starting with zero, right? We had a ton of like respective knowledge in our head, but we had no data, right? We had a hypothesis that how we were going to capture like this type of information and figure this out. So it was a little bit like building a tunnel through a big mountain, right? Like they all do out in the Rockies, right? You start at one end, you start on the other, and you have a good plan and you actually meet in the middle. Right, which is kind of cool, and that's where we did. It's like Eric was out working on, like talking to CISOs and CIOs about what kind of dashboard would be useful for you, right? What product? How do you want the product to work? Greg was leading the dissection of how this apparatus worked from a nation state perspective. Myself and Yvonne were working on like how do we capture all this data? How do we process this data? To get things up and running. And that's where you get the big picture of like, yeah, you're going to capture all this data. And I was like, oh my gosh, it is all in Chinese. And I studied German, which is not very useful if you're looking at Chinese all day. But you just learn to adapt. You say, okay, let's go to symbolics, right? Everything is symbolic, and let's build it up from the beginning to be symbolic recognition and take that forward. So I think it was like, how do we? So the team gave us a lot of latitude to like start building this out. Like I laid out a plan of like, this is how we capture, this is how we're going to process, this is how we're going to synthesize the data out of these pages, extract that data and organize it. And it was a solid five months of just pounding on keyboard, cranking on stuff, doing stuff. And then Greg will say that he was like, then I knew the system would work. Like we actually were able to I was able to run a query on a company and actually identify folks that had been compromised.
Mm-hmm.
So we had started saying, let's start building the product, right? Let's build out how we're doing that. But enterprise SaaS is hard, right? The average sales cycle for enterprise SaaS is 18 to 24 months from time of first encounter. 2 million, again, sounds like a large number. We'll put that in bold. 18 to 24 months is a really long time to do a sale.
That'll make you sweat when you look at your runway.
Makes you sweat. So then it goes into January of 2020. We were pre-revenue, right? That's a sexy term of no revenue, but that's, we like to call it, we're calling ourselves pre-rev. We started making, went out to Sand Hill Road, started making the pilgrimage, right? Talking to some folks and just like, well, we're a category creator. Well, what do you mean you're a category creator? We're this category. Well, then if you're a category creator and you have no revenue, that doesn't mean anybody's going to buy anything. So why should we give you any money?
Mm-hmm.
So we're like, okay, let's focus on revenue and we'll get something going there. And then March of 2020, the world changes, right? I still remember at that time, both my kids were in high school. I get the call at 6:30 in the morning, Loudoun County public schools are closed today.
Mm-hmm.
It's March. There's no snow. There's not even a forecast of snow. You and I live in Loudoun, so we can, Loudoun County, how they close at the threat of snow.
Yep.
And that's when we started hearing about COVID, right? That was pretty scary, right? Starting like the beginning of this thing, like that weekend went in, pulled my computers back to the house to hunker down. Yeah. No revenue, right? Burn. All we had was burn. We had some pretty nice burn. But they don't like that kind of a hockey stick on the burn. And then clients started signing up. So literally in March, we closed our first sale. And the next month we closed our next sale. And we actually had 4 clients, but by I think October. Right. So we had proven that we were able to convert on a scale that was way faster than the normal 18 to 16 to 24 month enterprise SaaS perspective. So then that's when we did the A.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a little bit there. Jumping there.
So that's a huge confidence boost. Getting those first 4 customers, and this is you may have touched on it already, but your target customers are Fortune 500 companies.
Fortune 250.
Fortune 250. Was that it from the start, or did you just kind of land in that zone?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And something that we here at Hatch, we from a sales perspective, right? It's easiest when you have some blockbuster customer names that you can then kind of use as your case studies to present to new prospects and say, well, XYZ is using it too. So did you find that as from growth, right? Once you landed those 4, did it kind of snowball, or did it take you a little bit of time to kind of like, how do we kind of package this story up of what this company's, how they used our products?
A core belief we've had at Strider from the beginning is that we want to have ultimate discretion, right? We would not say who our clients are. So if you go to our site, we do not list who our clients are. We have no logos up on our site. So yeah, it's a common approach in the SaaS category to do that, but we actually chose an alternate path of we weren't going to disclose who our clients were. Mm. Now, thankfully, some of those would be agreed to be, confidential references, or if they got down a certain path or something like that, we wouldn't even use that. we decided to attack the problem slightly differently, right? Let's use data as an unfair advantage, right? So I mentioned this notion of how we have built up a large set of data. Today, we now have like 3.5 billion objects in our corpus of documents, right? 700 million plus resumes on file. So we came up with a way to automatically figure out everything about a company without getting any information from a company. So we could enable the growth team, the sales folks, that they would not waste that time on prospecting. If there's an issue, we would actually arm them with, you want to talk to company A, just company B, because they have issues.
See, this is data is a very, very powerful thing when you're when you're working in this space. You're able to have a pretty solid year in 2020. Would you say that was a good steamroll year going into 2021?
Going into 2020 was a great way to close the A, have a nice set of clients that had already done it across a couple of industries, and then 2021 was really the taking that initial success and building that foundation to start getting more penetration into individual sectors.
Sure.
Right.
And there was a stat that I pulled up from a press release that said, increased annual recurring revenue by over 450% with 100% customer retention rate. That second stat line is really important. That 100% customer retention rate is really something to be proud of.
It is fantastic, right? I mean, to date, right, as of now, we still have 100% customer retention.
Wow.
Which is incredibly rare in a space that is seed stage enterprise SaaS. But industry's gold standard is like 90%.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you're doing above that, it's even better. But when I can go and say, no one has traded. Everyone has renewed. That tells you that what they're getting, it has value.
Yeah, it's validated. It's truly validating for you and your team to say that there's value here. And so let's bring it into the modern day here. So what was the size of Strider, for perspective here in that March of 2020 timeframe, right? From headcount, you said there was, you were pre-revenue. What was the headcount, and then going into 2021, what was that growth looking like?
Yeah, so I think March of 2020, I think we maybe had 8 people.
Okay.
In March of 2020, right?
And where are we at today?
Today we're close to 100. Wow. We're at like 95, 98, somewhere in that range. We're pretty darn close to getting that century mark from a staffing perspective. And
so this is do you see parallels from your time at ComScore in those early stages to to this wave of growth, or is this very, very different?
So I will say that we hit the mark way earlier than we did at ComScore, right? The first couple releases of data that we had at ComScore did not have that product market fit that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
We got really lucky, right, that we hit product market fit on our first go, right? And that's helped us drive and the go-to-market strategy, how we're able to use data to our advantage, right? A lot of those things we learned and adapted very quickly. That now we have this killer, super tight timeline to close a deal, right? Go in with actionable insight on the first encounter, right? Our goal and our motto is every encounter should provide new information to the client. Right? We shouldn't be there repeating. Repetition is good on certain things, but you always want to provide new insights.
Yeah.
And that model has helped us drive that great adoption from a customer perspective and keep our retention.
And you guys recently landed about $45 million in a Series B in April of this year. I think I saw total funding was around $57 million, something along those lines. what is it, from a growth plan perspective, what is top priority for you all right now, moving forward to close down this year and moving into next year?
So I think a top priority is solid encounters with clients, right? Let's not get ahead of our skis, right? We've always done things in a very measured, aggressive, but deliberate place, right? You don't want to go off a lot of companies when they do their B will go hire 100, quota carrying reps, right?
Sure.
And then all of a sudden you can't deliver on that data, or you have customer service problems, and then you hit that stage where that ugly B2C stage where you have customer service issues or churn issues or things like that. Let's engage and latch on to that 100%. Let's continue that mantra of how we got here and provide that, legendary customer service, right? Of how we understand what the issue is. Do we have an aggressive plan? Sure, right? But we have an attainable plan, right? That's the goal. Is like one of the things I've learned, being on the management team of a publicly traded company where you're going to quarterly numbers, right? We have to get down to you have to beat by a penny. You want to beat by a penny. You don't want to miss by a penny because the penalty is just immense, right? And I think we've taken that approach at Strider. Now, granted, it's a little bit more chill because we're not public, right? But we have the team to do it. Right? We are driven on this mission, right, to help protect the IP of our clients and move to gain a better advantage, leveraging data to our advantage.
Sure. Yeah, it's full transparency. We are a recruiting partner of Strider, and we are obviously looking at scaling up certain areas on the tech team. I want to quickly ask, and then we'll dive into some a segment called 5 Second Scramble.
Sure.
We'll do a couple of rapid fire questions, but paint for me the picture, the lay of the land at Strider. You said nearing 100 folks. What do the tech teams look like here? And I know that you've got an office out in Utah, and then you've got an office here and an office in London, I believe. Can you paint the picture for me of how the technical teams are structured?
Yeah, so there is no technical affinity for a location, right? So you have a team that's what I call focused on collection, team focused on extraction, processing, big believer in development of internal tools. How do you make the team work better with the stuff you have? And then you have delivery, and then you have IT, right, as a standard support function from IT and security. That's the core pillars from the technology organization. But those folks are in all locations.
Okay. And how big roughly are the size of the teams?
So I'm a big believer. I do like the notion of you want to keep your core teams to what can feed what 2 pizzas or whatever is a good number, right?
Yeah.
A good simple heuristics. So at this stage, I think we have 5. Oh, and I also have a data team, right? A data science team.
Okay.
So most of the teams are around 3 to 4 right now, right? Which is, we've got that good foundation of leaders. Now we're building up that next set of leaders, bringing in talent to do that, to scale across all of those functions, right? So we have really needs across all of those functions.
That'll lead me into this next segment. We'll learn a little bit more about some of these different roles and
Sure.
A little bit more about the culture here. So yeah, this is going to be a segment called 5 Second Scramble. You'll have 5 seconds to kind of sum up your answers, and let's dive right into it. So explain your product to me as if I were a 5-year-old.
We help identify the people that have been coerced to steal your stuff.
I got that. What problems are you solving?
Nation state IP theft.
Who are your users?
Chief security officers, insider threat professionals, general counsels.
What's your favorite aspect about working at Strider?
There's always a cool problem to work on.
What aspect of your culture do you most fear losing with growth?
The team camaraderie, right? Just those tight teams and knowing who does what.
What about your work keeps you up at night?
Putin doing something crazy.
I was going to say, the type of work that you guys are doing, there's enough to scare yourself a little bit of what happens out there. What type of engineer would you say thrives at Strider?
Adaptable.
Very nice. And what's one of your favorite hobbies?
Oh, I love to cook. Right? Software development has taught me like you can pound on a program all day long, but go home, you make some food. At least you'll have food on the table at the end of the day.
Do you keep the recipes, or do you make something new every time?
I sometimes make something new. I love trying different stuff. I'll do some French. I'll do Indian. I'll do smoke a brisket. I'll not a fan of Thai, which my wife is not very happy with, but that's another issue altogether.
When can I come over for dinner?
Next time I smoke a brisket, I'll send you a note.
That sounds
You don't
wonderful.
live very far apart.
Favorite app on your phone?
Probably Quora.
Okay. Do you have a favorite superhero?
Batman.
Classic. Good answer. The right answer. And now these don't have to be 5 seconds. I want to get a little bit more intel on some stuff at Strider. What's the core kind of like tech stack that you're building with over there?
From the data side, big Elasticsearch shop, right? Elasticsearch is huge for what we do. From a dev perspective, the backends we're Python shop, right? The delivery side is not a Python from what customers see. That's Node, React, standard, responsive single page app type.
And we talked a little bit about the growth. You're certainly hiring right now. What would you say are some of those key roles right now that are really top of mind that would help round out your teams? What are some of those positions?
If you're a mid to senior engineer, right, that knows Python or another language similar to Python or just has skills in Java or C or things like that, we're a great shop. If you like working with data and working on interesting problems that make a difference to the Western world, right? Mm-hmm. Give us a look, right? We're doing stuff that's interesting that no one else that I know of is actually doing outside of maybe some intelligence agencies.
Yeah, certainly, looking for folks that are probably very passionate about the mission, right? I mean, this seems like you gotta be enthusiastic about the mission.
The mission alignment. The mission alignment is huge.
Yeah. And when you hired, would you say that you kind of hire for a general skill set, or do you hire to fill like a specific need on a specific team?
I've been in tech a while, right? Technologies change, technologies evolve, right? I look for folks that can evolve, right? That are adaptable, much like what I said, adaptable, right? What the hot tool or technique is today will most likely be different in 5 years, right? I want someone to be along with that journey.
Yeah.
Right? Some of the biggest things that brought me joy from my time at Comscore was being able to evolve the team from the days of everything being in low-level C to higher-level languages like Java, and moving from building your own individual distributed framework to leveraging frameworks like, right, or just massive things. That's what you want to do. If you're going to build a good, strong culture, is how you can grow the team and don't treat people as disposable.
Sure. Yeah, that's well said. My last question, just in closing, somebody who's worked in, you said 5 startups, is there a certain stage that, you would say is the most exciting for you? And what would that be? And you've seen from, the founding engineer to IPO and beyond, what are the stages that you think are really, really exciting as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So with a company growing, it's a lot like a kid, right? There's is there a favorite stage, like when your baby's born to when they're like toddlers, or you're taking them to like first out doing like soccer practice, to watching them go through high school graduation,
to travel hockey leagues,
travel hockey. It's I kind of think there's things of each different stage that I just really love, right? The very beginning of like this really hard, like, how do we make this work? Can this actually do it? Like that classic, like, yeah, I believe we can make something work here. And you actually get to see that, right? After months of hard work, to how do you build up that org team? How do you build that org structure to grow efficiently? How do you scale from like one client to 4 to 10 to 20 to 30 to those type of things? I don't know. I'm hard for me to choose a specific stage, right? But long as you're growing, long as you're building, it's all good to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's tough. Like I like your reference of your kids. It's like you're gonna have favorite times of different stages of their development, their life, right? It's tough to pick just a small part, but as long as you kind of always work towards the big picture of growing it out, it's all part of what keeps you motivated. So I'm really happy that we were able to connect, Mike. We're excited to call you guys a partner, and really excited for you all to continue to build and satisfy this critical mission. So thanks for joining us on the Hatchpad as well.
Thanks for being a great partner.